This is when much of the church shifted from ministries to programs, and children's ministries also followed suit, pulling children out of the sermon so they could be indoctrinated in the classrooms. And so to speed things along today, I crudely summarized where we were with children and youth ministries. And if I could summarize where I think we are today, I would suggest that our ministries have not, for the large part in the American church, stepped out of the molds they were created in. And this puts us at a really unique juncture for the legacy of the church, knowing both the advantages of becoming more aware. I'm sorry, I don't know what I was reading there. This puts us at a unique junction where we can hold in tension both the advantages and the disadvantages of separating children from our main worship space. We think about this, and it sits on one hand, this is a really good idea. Sits on the other hand, I don't know how I feel about this. And we're somewhere in the middle now in 2016 between those tensions. And so I think this is a great time for the Christian church to start thinking more outside of the box and reimagine what youth and children's ministry could look like going forward. Now, towards that end, there were two highlights that I want to share with you about our time in Chicago. Three, if I tell you that I ate my fill of Chicago-style pizza. So good. So good. So you don't go to Chicago and not eat pizza. You're just in trouble if you do. So much of the conference was full of good reminders for me, and one of those included the incredible amount of information we now have on child and adolescent development. So many studies didn't begin until the late 70s, 1980s, 1990s, and they're just really beginning to benefit now in developmental and psychological studies. And through this research, we've been able to pinpoint more of the specific needs and desires of our kids. The Search Institute has an incredible list of 40 developmental assets for children and adolescents, and it's truly incredible stuff. I put the link in the sermon notes so you can look at those later, but pore over those. Those are fabulous. But Chap Clark, however, has a good summary in his book, Hurt, suggesting that the primary longings of our youth would be these. There's a longing to belong, a longing to matter, to be wanted, a longing for safe places, a longing to be taken seriously, and a longing to be uniquely themselves. And I believe he goes as far to suggest that if the church is unable or unwilling to meet such longings, our children will find those longings fulfilled elsewhere. Now, in a perfect world, we would sit here together until late tonight where we could give each other and these longings proper consideration in light of what we're offering, what we model, what we value as it pertains to youth. But I want to make space so you can hear from Mary, and I know some of you will need to pick up your kids, and some of you have to mow grass today, and other important things. So I'm going to try to keep this brief, but let's zone in just on the need for safety, a safe place. Now, I self-identify as a millennial, and if you read the news headlines, I'm of the generation that can't seem to move out of our parents' basement, but can also figure out your new cell phone in less than an hour, right? So if you follow the headlines, we're kind of portrayed as simultaneously brilliant and simultaneously stupid. We're kind of this weird thing, and depending on how my day is going on any given day, there's a case to be made for either of those, all right? So, but my generation was probably best defined by two horrific and violent acts. The school shooting at Columbine High School in 1999 and the destruction of the Twin Towers a mere 2 years later. Both events occurred while I was in high school, and the predominant message is sent to my generation that we do not have an ethic of vulnerability. We don't know what it means to be vulnerable because leaders in our government and our churches told us that we're not supposed to be vulnerable. And so they advocated to respond to violence, with violence to teach others that violence is not okay, all the while neglecting to answer the questions of our hearts. Does my life mean anything in a world where tomorrow is not guaranteed? Because it seemed like folly to find our identities in our careers, in our future families, in our accumulations, and our longing for safety became a deeper hole than the generations before us. And now, in light of Charleston and Sandy Hook, the hole has become even deeper for the generations behind mine. In fact, a week ago today in Pennsylvania, a man was shot in the chest at a church over an argument about reserved seats. So what does it say when safety in the church stops at skin color and reserved seats? Would we blame anyone for believing churches might not be safe places for passions and for questions and for uncertainty or for doubts? Why would we put hope in the church? And for those of you who are wondering about the decline of attendance in mainstream churches, you've arrived at the iceberg. So my question became, does the church have anything to say about these longings? And if not, we're going to have to do some serious soul searching about why the church should matter in 2016 and beyond. Now, just to make it clear, I believe that the church not only has something to say about the longings of our hearts, but I also believe the church's ability to meet these needs is overwhelmingly better than the options that the world offers to us. The world's counter offers send disappointment, and we don't have to look very far to see that we're hungry for something better. If anyone here has been sitting with Beyonce's visual album Lemonade, which dropped last week, you'll pick up on these threads of longing that are woven throughout that album, especially as they pertain to relationships and her need to matter, to belong, and to be safe. They're the same needs you and I have, and they have been perpetually neglected for women and children of color. And we need an approach to children's and youth ministry that has something to say about that. Oh, and if you don't know what a visual album is, just grab your nearest millennial after the service and they'll fill you in. They're really fabulous. So here's my second takeaway from the conference. And it touched on this theme. Mary and I took an afternoon to hike over to the Chicago Institute of Arts. And their featured exhibit was titled Van Gogh's Bedrooms, Let Yourself In. And my first reaction was, well, this sounds voyeuristic and creepy. But my second reaction was, even if an art novice like myself can recognize the Van Gogh name, it's probably something I should make myself go and see, just so my more cultured friends don't call me a dummy for saving $6 and skipping the exhibit. And so I entered the exhibit hall, and I began to wander through the collections of sketches and inspired works of Vincent van Gogh, and the thing that struck me most wasn't his artwork in particular, but it was the words which were printed on a painted wall alongside a 15-foot map of France, which denoted all the locations that he had resided. And the exhibit intro read like this. Van Gogh's life was short and nomadic. By the time he died at the age of 37, he had lived in 37 separate residences across 24 cities, mostly as a boarder or a guest, dependent on the hospitality of family or friends. In 1888, he finally moved to the only home he truly considered his own, his beloved Yellow House in Arles. Many of his many bedrooms, Van Gogh immortalized the only one from the Yellow House, 3 times in fact. And this exhibition brings together all 3 versions of the bedroom for the first time in North America, offering a pioneering and in-depth study of their making and meaning to Van Gogh and his relentless quest for home. A relentless quest for home. And isn't that what we're all looking for in the church? A home. A place of our own. A place where our voices are heard and our needs are met and our longings can be fulfilled. A place where we don't have to leave once we turn 18. A place that always welcomes us back if we should wander. And this is ultimately what we are working to build for our youth and our children, their own yellow home. And each of us will have a role and a responsibility to our children, regardless of our family status or our life stage. And this is where I want to make space for Mary to come and share more about herself with you and to offer a story that invites us to imagine what a relationship to our children and our church's children might look like. So, you go to the stage, Mary. One of the things I want to share about Mary is I have been delighted to have partnered with her in serving your children for the last 4 months. One of my observations about Mary is that she surprised me. I think she identifies first as a dancer and then as a children's coordinator second. And I believe that's a tremendous gift to our church, that she would be wired in such a way to teach our children how to dance and how to experience life. So please welcome Mary.
Thank you. Yes, it's true. I do teach dance 3 days a week to little kids, but I love being here and I love working here. I've been the children's ministry coordinator, not for 7 years, like Nigel, but for 4 months. But in these past 4 months, I have met just amazing people, both kids and adults. And I've gotten to talk to children about their growing faith. And I've had the privilege to attend a conference with Nigel and many other passionate volunteers. And I've even had the privilege to start a garden outside with some of our kids. And I also get to do this working side by side with my awesome fiance, Julius. So that's really fun. Oh, thank you. So can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So working in and being a part of this community, I have seen so much love, growth, and life. And I've experienced these 3 themes in myself, in our volunteers, and in the members of our community, including the children that we get to experience Jesus with. And of those 3 themes, I've been struck most by the theme of life. What does it mean to be alive? And how do we recognize life? As I wrestled with these questions, I want to invite you to enter into the story of Jesus' interaction with a young girl, as I believe it has really important things to say about how we approach a children and youth ministry program in our local church. This story starts with a man named Jairus seeking Jesus' aid to heal his sick daughter. And as Jesus is on his way to heal her, he gets a little sidetracked helping a woman with a condition or with an issue of blood. And I can imagine that Jairus was in a bit of a rush as his only daughter is at home dying. So the story is recorded in Luke 8, if you guys want to follow along. And it continues like this. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. And meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead, but asleep." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand, and he said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. So my reaction to this story is really just to ask more questions. If this girl was alive, how did nobody notice that she was just asleep? Or was she dead, showing no signs of life, while Jesus refers to death as sleep, as he did with his friend Lazarus that he raised from the dead? Either way, Jesus seems to define death a little differently than we do in this story. He comes to the girl whose family had come to mourn, who had been declared as dead. But Jesus is interacting with this girl in the lens of the kingdom, which is greater than the powers of death. Not only does this story touch on and address my initial question of what is life, but it also invites us to consider how children are really a part of the kingdom. I feel like this story has become a metaphor for how many churches have come to view children's role within the kingdom. Do we see our children's ministry and our children as dead, like the girl in this story, as something that doesn't really serve a purpose? Maybe your initial reaction when I say that is to push back, but I want you to sit with it for just a little while. Because what I've been asking myself is, what vital signs, what heartbeat are evident to know that the children are alive in our community? When a loved one dies, we express hope that we will one day see them again in a life to come. And it's that kind of distant hope. It's a good hope, but it's that distant hope that it takes time to be fulfilled. Do we hold that same hope for the spiritual lives of our children? Just like we hope to see our loved ones one day that have passed away, we hope to see them alive again. We hope that our children will one day come to life and be purposeful, active members in the kingdom when they're no longer children, when they're adults in the future. So if we enter back into the story, We experience this great flip where the crowd labels Jesus a fool for not being able to recognize death, but then Jesus reverses it, and he makes them fools for not recognizing life. I think that there's so much life in our children. These children are alive, and they're full of passion and purpose right now. We don't have to wait for them to come back to life, as you would say, excuse me, when they become adults. If we laugh at Jesus and we declare them dead or unpurposeful or too little, then we really become the fools in this story. Our children are actively seeking out the kingdom every Sunday, and I've gotten to see it. I've gotten to experience it. For example, this year we invited children to experience the sacrament of baptism with the greater church. And that very morning afterwards, as we were walking back to their class, I had several kids asking questions about what baptism means, asking about my own baptism, and expressing excitement at their own future baptism. That is life. And just last week, Christopher, one of our awesome Mission Outpost interns, he led our elementary students in planting the garden outside. And we use this activity as a parallel to our own spiritual journey and our own growth, and as a metaphor for evangelism. They shared stories of who shared Jesus with them and who continues to share Jesus with them. And together, they came up with ways that they can be Jesus to other people. And while outside, after taking complete ownership of that garden and just digging their hands into the soil and planting the seeds that they themselves chose, they prayed over the land together and just asking Jesus for a good harvest. And I think that that is proof of an active spiritual life in our children. So what has Jesus described in this story? Like, what is he inviting us to do? Although Jesus does the miracle by simply speaking life back into the girl, the adults in the story are not void of responsibility. He tells them to get her something to eat. She still needs care. And just as Jesus tells Peter to feed his sheep, we see here that Jesus is telling us to feed his children. He will awaken the sleeping, but we have so much responsibility in feeding and caring for these little ones. He will awaken her, but he tells us to not let her die again. This thing with feeding, though, is that it has to be consistent. We don't feed our children only when it's convenient for us. We feed them consistently. We don't feed them only when they're starving. We feed them consistently. We have to so they can continue to grow. A consistent presence is the best way to form a relationship with children. A consistent presence is how we communicate the truly unconditional love that Christ has for them. And when we fail to be consistent, and when our service is conditional, how are we communicating the love that Christ calls us to share? If a child comes to church and is not known by name, will they truly believe that the God of the universe who created all things knows them deeply and intimately by name? So let us not forget who Jesus names as these significant shareholders in the kingdom, whose names deserve to be remembered and deserve to be spoken out. In Matthew 10, we see an account of Jesus interacting with children. It says, "People were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, 'Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these.' Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. So like the story before, this one raises questions about children. Why did the disciples try to keep the children away from Jesus? Was it because they saw the children as unimportant? Did they see them as an inconvenience, as too loud, as too messy, as people lacking in purpose, like the dead girl in the story? Again, we see Jesus flip our norms completely upside down. The culture saw children as unimportant, but Jesus saw them as the most important. Jesus goes so far as to say that the kingdom belongs to them. And that's a really big deal. At that point in time, children owned nothing. For a child to own a kingdom, though, that is revolutionary. But it makes me ask, is our culture much different today? I'm dreaming of a church community where kids aren't at risk as being viewed as inconvenient. We're dreaming together of what their ownership in the church looks like as we empower them and walk alongside them as we work for the kingdom together. How amazing would it be to have a church where the children teach us as much as we feel we teach them? And I'm excited to invite you to dream these dreams with me and to hold this vision with me. Because if Jesus says that the kingdom of God belongs to such as these, they have an extraordinary purpose. Their purpose is to grab heaven with two hands and just totally yank it down to earth. And because they have this extraordinary purpose, we, all of us, have this extraordinary responsibility to help them receive it and to help them just be responsible for it. So at this time, I want to invite the band back up, and I want to go over a few practical tips for us this morning. So much of our time behind the scenes is working just to make sure that these programs run every week. And most specifically, we screen, we train, and we assign volunteers to partner with us as we aim to create the spaces that I've tried to describe to you guys today. And right now, we are short on help, which often leaves us scrambling to find replacement helpers, and that really threatens our hope for a foundation to build upon. And so a practical tip today is to pick up an application for children's ministry at the front of the sanctuary and join in. They will be here and here. Not only will you get to teach and lead some amazing children that we have here, but you will also learn from them and be blessed by them, and I promise that. So completed applications can be given to any staff member that you see wearing a black name badge. One of our takeaways from the conference was this reminder to engage better with our community so that we avoid having this rogue staff, us forgetting to hear the stories and the needs of the very people that we're honored to serve. So towards that end, we will be hosting some roundtable conversations here at the church in the next few weeks. To anybody who's currently volunteering with children and youth or who is interested in volunteering with children or youth, and then also parents or really just those generally interested in learning more about what God is doing in the lives of young people. So we'll be scheduling a few of these in the upcoming weeks. And so a second practical tip would just be to participate and share your voice, your hopes, and your needs so that all things might be considered as we discern best how to love and serve each other. So keep checking back in our paper bulletins and social media outlets for those opportunities. Third is, my purpose for speaking to you is not to sell you children's ministry. You guys don't need to be sold anything else. The purpose of my speaking is just to ask you to invest in the children, inside and outside of their classes. So the third practical tip would just be to commit to learning the names and learning the stories of the kids and the youth that you see around here, whether or not you serve in the children and youth ministry. And last but not least, we know that the children thrive best when they are surrounded by safe and healthy relationships. And one way we can nurture that beyond Sunday mornings is through our life group opportunities here at the Vineyard. A life group is, well, exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of people that are committed to doing life together. So we'd love to see new and diverse life groups form around young families with intergenerational values. And if you would be interested in partnering with a family to host a life group, or you've survived raising your own children and you have encouragement to pass on, we would love to explore what doing life could look like, or doing life together could look like with you. So simply reach out to our main office at mainoffice@AnnArborVineyard.org, or speak to one of our staff members, and we will help you get the ball rolling. A list of currently meeting life groups is available just outside the gallery in the carpeted hallway. So at this point, Sean is going to continue us in worship through offering, and then Anna will lead communion. Thank you, guys.